Hello, and welcome to the Miami Showband Peace Center Online, a truth and reconciliation platform project. Continuing our Speaking for Myself series, our witnesses today are Hazel Deeney and Paul Gallagher, whose testimonies you're about to hear. Our panelists are retired Irish Army officer and the Journal.ie Security Correspondent, Dr. Tom Clonan, and William Ennis of the Progressive Unionist Party, and William is a student of psychology. Our executive producer and co-founder of TaRP, Eugene Reavey, joins us from Whitecross in County Armagh, and the Truth and Reconciliation Platform Ambassador to the UK, Joe Campbell, joins us from London, and you're all very welcome. If we can start off by asking our friend Paul Gallagher to give us his testimony. Thanks, Paul, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Stephen. I suppose my introduction to the Troubles came when I was born in 1972, in the worst year, and my family moved into one of the homes that had been evacuated. Well, evacuated is one way of putting it, but people had been forced out of their homes and they moved into it in the Suffolk and Lennox estate, where there was a lot of trouble going on. My first sort of brush with the conflict really would have came when I was 1 year old, and we were close to Woodburn Barracks police station at the time, and the IRA had taken pot shots at the army, and a bullet came through the window of our living room, and one of them just went right above my head as I was in my high chair. Moving on a few years, growing up along that peace line, you were sort of dodging bullets, dodging riots, dodging fights with the local Protestant lads across in the Suffolk estate as you went across to the shops. Moving on maybe to around about the time of the hunger strikes in 1981. Outside our front door, there was a young girl was hit in the head with a plastic bullet. I wasn't too far away at the time, and she died the next day. But apart from that, over the years, basically, I think I got away with it up to a certain extent. I suppose you're growing up through your teenage years and getting involved in recreational riding across the peace line and things like that, and then you grow up and you start to wise up and get to school and get on with your life and live like a teenager, get your exams and start going out to work. And that's what I did basically, and with a good laugh, with good friends and all that sort of thing. But the Troubles actually came to my door on the 6th of January 1994, and it was a literal knock on the front door. 4 men barged their way in, past my little sister Joanne, who had opened the door to them. They pulled down their balaclavas, pushed their way in. They were they said they were the IRA, but it turned out they were the UVF or UDA, whatever name they used at that time. Their intention was to come and assassinate my next door neighbours, who were, I think, Republicans or ex-prisoners. They only moved in recently. I didn't have much to do with them. Their home was fortified and cages and whatever else. Our home wasn't. Our home was an open home. It was a home where a lot of people just walked in and out, young people, and my mum sort of had an open house and made sure we were always there, where she could keep an eye on us. But this night, the door opened and these 4 guys came in. They held myself hostage. They held my mum, my younger brother Damien, he was 18. I was 21 at the time. Joanne was 14. And they held us in our living room together for about an hour. In between that time, the door knocked and I was told to go out and bring whoever it was in, or else my family be shot. First time was my dad came in and a couple of beers on him. It was a bit of an altercation. Like, basically, what are you doing in my house type thing, and not so many words. He had a gun put to his head and was told to sit down and shut up. if you value your life, you'll sit down, and he sat down. I was trying to keep things calm and whatever else. But 15 minutes later, during this time, things were getting a bit sort of fractious. People were being a bit nervous. The door went again, and this time it was 4 of Joanne's friends, 14-year-olds, and they came, and I said this time, look, go on, use on up the street. She's in around another friend's house. And they went on. I came in, sat down. It was an argument really as to, you were told to bring these people in, why didn't you do it? I just said, you can't bring kids into this. You know what I mean? You'll be doing what you're doing, you're away, and that's the end of it. We didn't know what they were there for. But it turned out that was the end of their operation. Within a couple of minutes, they'd left the room, closed the door behind them. We thought it was all over. Then there was a kick at the door, and one of them shouted, "Operation's over," and opened up with his automatic weapon into the room. I was closest to the door. I was hit 6 times. Sitting down, I was hit through my right hand side. Bullets went in and out the other side in some ways. Damaged my first one sort of hit my arm. Other ones hit my thigh, severed my femoral artery. Other ones went through, hit the spine, hit my lung, hit my spleen as well. So you can probably imagine the scene. It was pretty much pandemonium. I was getting in and out of consciousness. You could hear my parents trying to phone the ambulance. My brother was trying to fill the wounds and stop the bleeding with towels, shoving a wooden spoon in my mouth to try and stop me from biting my tongue, slap me around the head to try and keep me awake, squeezing me, stay awake, all the way this going on. I'm getting in and out, just fading away, basically, not knowing where I was going. The ambulance came, and the guys got me into the back of the ambulance, brought me down to the Royal within a few minutes. That was fun as well. I think at that stage I don't know what they'd given me, but I was singing and chanting like some sort of Native American chant the whole way down and into the surgery, really. And like the last thing I remember was the surgeon saying, "Can somebody shut this man up singing?" But apart from that, that was me. I woke up a few days later. I woke up with a ventilator tube down my throat, trying to keep me breathing. Didn't know where I was. First person was there was this nurse holding my hand. To me, he was like an angel. You know, I didn't know who he was or what was going on. I couldn't communicate because I had this tube down my throat. My family were brought in, and the first thing I did was sort of motion for a pen. I was able to just write down, "Don't worry, be happy." And "Jah lives," which is a bit of an old Bob Marley song. You know, so something was coming through me anyway from those days anyway, my Rasta days. But that was me then, having to get used to a new life. Because when you look back at it, the life I had before, it's gone. I was told within a few days that I was paralyzed, that I would have to get around on a wheelchair, and I would never walk again, and all the other things that disability and everything else would bring. And it was a struggle for a good lot of those years. Struggle to come out of hospital. You know what I mean? Went back into the same home. There had to be a ramp put outside the front. I lived in the front sitting room. That was my bedroom for about a year or so, until there was an extension built on. I had a bathroom. So all these sort of different struggles to get on with. I wasn't fit enough to go back to work. I'd been working in the civil service at the time. I was just covered in these wounds. Holes all over me, just in a lot of pain. Having to get used to just living life as somebody with paraplegia, which wasn't great. A lot of infections and these things over the years have built up and whatever else. And I just sort of got on with life really, and wasn't really doing much. I was in my 20s partying and stuff, and no real focus of anywhere that where I was going to go with it. Not really doing anything. It was only really, I think, when I came along to the likes of WAVE and other victims groups around about 2009. And that was shortly after the Eames Bradley debacle down at Stormont. And I'd spotted this on TV and seen a lot of victims fighting with each other and screaming in each other's faces on TV over who's a victim and who isn't. And I'd sort of seen myself as being just one of those ordinary victims that get caught up in all this. You know what I mean? If people wanted to say that I was an innocent victim, I was shot really, because any Catholic will do. I think was the way that these guys sort of operated at the time, back in 1984, just killing as many innocent Catholics as possible. And I just happened to be a part of that and get caught up in that, and that was my reality. And I thought of maybe starting to think about victims' issues and started to say maybe I had a voice to add to this debate. And I got involved with WAVE and met up with people like Alan. I'd seen Alan on TV. I'd seen his journey over the years as the angry young man chasing after Jerry Adams with placards and screaming and shouting, to maybe being on TV later on and talking about his journey of moving on from it, and how he'd been. And I'd sort of seen myself on a similar sort of pathway and thought he's a sort of kindred spirit I could sort of go and meet and talk to, and I did. I ended up getting involved with the WAVE Injured group within WAVE, and at that stage they had sort of started out on a campaign for recognition for people who were injured. They had read Ames Bradley, and they had seen that a lot of it was based on looking after the needs of the bereaved, really, and finding truth and justice and things like that for people. The likes of myself and people who were injured, it was more about the day-to-day and next week and the next few years and how you were going to survive. A lot of us didn't go back to work. A lot of us were on the dole for many years and just had no way of bringing anything in, or a pension or anything like that. People have been left really badly let down for years. So I got involved with that group. At the same time, when I joined WAVE, it started getting involved with different cross-community groups as well. The local interface group on Suffolk and Lenadoon, where I still live, I got involved with them. Just trying to make a sort of difference. My thinking behind it was around, I had young nieces and nephews coming up behind me, and they were starting to ask questions about what happened to me. And you'd only say for so long that you've hurt your legs and you use a wheelchair. And they're going to start finding out, they live in the area. And for me, I didn't want them harboring any sort of vengeance or hatred for the other side for what they did to me. So I wanted to go out and sort of show that I wasn't holding any of those emotions or thoughts. So, say, getting involved with WAVE, then went back to school as well, went back in Open University and started trying to learn things around the social sciences. When I joined WAVE, there was different courses around trauma, different short courses, started doing those and started giving me an insight into the journey that I had been on. And that was great. It just sort of opened my eyes up to who I'd been over those early years and where I was going to. I ended up doing a degree in psychological trauma studies at Queen's then through WAVE. I moved on, did my master's in conflict transformation and social justice. And straight away after that, I started a PhD, which I've been at for this past 3 years, and I'm in the final stages of it. But that has sort of taken me right through a whole different journey of learning about trauma, of learning about victims' issues from a theory level, but also from a practical level, and being able to be a teacher as well to people, being involved in WAVE's citizen education scheme, which involves groups of people like ourselves, different victims, injured people, bereaved people, to go out into the schools and into the colleges and into universities and talk to the young people who don't have a living memory of the conflict, but are living in a place that is wrecked by conflict and still is affected by conflict, to give them a sense of our voice. And just like this right at the moment, and this opportunity right now, is to actually try and teach all generations about the conflict here, the effect it had on people, but also that we aren't just defined by what happened to us. You know what I mean? We're all different people in our own right, have our own stories to tell, and bring our own baggage with us, and can add to hopefully peace and reconciliation. And that's the thing I've been involved with over this past number of years is trying to reach out there, trying to maybe in some cases be an inspiration to people, getting the opportunity to tell my story, but also getting the opportunity to listen to other people too and to hear their story. And that's been great. Getting involved with the Victims Forum, meeting people from across the board who have been affected by the troubles here in many ways. But also then going on what I call this journey of growth over the years, post-traumatic growth. When I started to learn about post-traumatic stress disorder and doing the trauma course, I started to learn about growth as well. That there was another way beyond the trauma, and not just recovering from it, but actually becoming a better person and growing from it. And I learned that through these sort of things around the struggle with the trauma and the struggle with the new life. And the way it's done is around having the opportunity to tell your story and to get your narrative out there and to sort of build on your narrative. You accept that the life you had before is gone and there's a new life and a new growth that starts there. And looking back over those years, there was different times, there was different seeds of growth sort of planted within me through the care and support I had from my family, from friends, from the community, and from others around. Being able to just listen to my story, to take something out of it. And there's this give and take of being a storyteller that actually works for me, but I think also works for other people. And it's this sort of combination of both that has actually helped me over the years.
Thanks for that, Paul, and for your amazing courage in telling it so and telling your story so well. But along with that, also for the great work you've done through your association with Wave Trauma, and I'm just watching everybody else here as you were talking. As you know, we're joined here by the co-founder of TaRP. He's up there, Eugene Reavey, up there in Whitecross in County Armagh, and he's a man that's suffered enormously as well, the loss of his three brothers, and also Joe Campbell, whose father was murdered. And I just see them nodding their heads, and even to people who have been hardened and used to hearing trauma, I just see them nodding along in agreement with you that you're an inspiration to all of us. If I can ask Hazel Deeney to share her story with us.
I'm just an ordinary person. I was very lucky growing up, I suppose. The conflict never ever affected me, such as I was young. I think the first time I even realised there was a conflict going on, I was 16 and I was going to the tech when the hunger strikers was dying, and I seen all this tenseness, but that was in the city side. I come from the predominantly Protestant side and the water side. So once you came back across and got on the bus and got back to your own wee enclave, life just went on. I met my husband, who was Trevor Deeney. I heard of him and I didn't really know him, and they say love is blind because I was well warned, or you lost the leave of your senses getting involved with somebody like him, but there you go. So the first big thing of the conflict then, I suppose, when it came for me, Trevor joined the UVF when he was 16 years of age. I will say it was something that never came into my home. It was something I was never brought up with. But I wasn't naive, that when he was going out, whatever, I didn't know what he was ever going out to do, but I knew that he'd been involved. The first time that ever really had us as a family was at Grey Steel. My brother-in-law was one of the gunmen in Grey Steel. And it was a terrible atrocity. It was a terrible atrocity for everybody, So in 1998, the January of 1998, the police came to our house and they said that Trevor had been threatened with a Republican element. They came and showed us how to look under your car and safeguard your home. my kids then, we had 4 kids, we stopped their friends coming to stay or things at night, but without saying anything, because we felt it was a big responsibility bringing anybody else's children to come to stay in your house. Trevor had a job in Transtech car component factory. He'd been in and out of prison. The last time he had been out of prison was the late 90. The day my father died, Trevor actually had been arrested, and he was going to shoot someone, and he got, I think it was, I don't know how many years, I say 5 years anyway, and then he served him in the UVF wing in the Maze prison. When he came out, I knew that he had got further involved. Prison had did that. As I say, he got a job in Translink or Transtech. Anyway, we decided to buy our first home together, because before that it was me who bought the house, because I was always worried. And my uncle said to me one day, "You're either married or you're not." He'd settled down. He was on a 40-12 shift. I left the house at 11:30 that night to go and pick him up, and I got down to Transtech, and we left. We're driving up the road, and I noticed when we were coming up the Crescent Link Road and onto the Ross Downey Road, I thought, "Cheekers, all them traffic lights or lampposts are all out." But that sometimes wouldn't be unusual. But we lived in a cul-de-sac with 12 houses, and I was driving, and we had drove down. We were number 1, and we drove down. It was a steep enough wee hill, and pulled into the driveway. And Trevor was a very house pride person, and he would never go into the house with shoes or the things I got on from work. And he put his foot up onto the dashboard, because we just got the hall tiled. We bought a brand new house. We got the hall tiled that day, and I seen somebody running, and he looked round, and the next minute he was screaming his head off, "I'm going to die, I'm going to die." And I thought, what's going on? The next minute he grabbed me by the waist, and I looked up, and there was 2 gunmen. One was standing at the passenger's windscreen, and one was standing at the passenger's door, and they were wearing these freckled masks and black jackets, and they started to shoot into the car, and it was like firecrackers going off, and my mind just went blank. Whatever way one of the bullets hit Trevor, he slumped against me, and I slumped against the driver's door, and as he done that, a bullet went through my headrest. So when the police took the car to forensics, they said the bullet was millimeters from my head. One of the bullets went past my legs and hit my work diary. I was working with the district nurses in Strabane Health Centre at the time. I don't know what it was that hit. I don't know, was it the shell of a bullet or what it was, but it hit my hip, and I have a kind of slight lump, and it's painful sometimes, but was nothing. But shouldn't seem to go on for a long time, but it probably was only minutes. And at this stage, Trevor was still this grip against my waist. So I thought, well, they're gone now. So I opened the car door, and the grip that he had, I don't know how it happened, but I was able to get him across the car, and he fell literally right on top of me on the driveway. And I remember thinking, it's over now, it's done. And just as he did that, the gunmen reloaded their guns and started to come around the side of the house where the car was. And I remember thinking, screaming, "I'm dying, I'm going to die," because it was literally underneath him. He was semi-conscious, so he released his grip on me, and I was able to slide out from underneath and started to run down the side of the house. And as crazy as the time would be, the first thing I remember thinking is, I've dropped my purse. I don't know why that came into my head, but it was one of them random things. So there was an oil tank right beside the house, and I stood there, and I was literally, when people say they're froze to the spot, I know what that feels like. Stood at the top, the oil tank, and I had to watch while it ended up Trevor was shot 22 times. His body was flinching as if he were lifting a fish out of water, and I just stood and closed my eyes in because I couldn't watch no longer. And it went deathly quiet, and I couldn't move, and I thought, I need to do something, but I was scared. I thought, they're coming now down for me. but I managed to get in the back, we patio doors at the back, and I was crawled on my hands and knees, was able to phone the emergency services, and then I phoned down to my mummy's, and I had to sort of say, my kids were all in bed, this was after 12 o'clock at night, and I remember thinking, you need to pull yourself together, he needs you, you need to go out there. And I was really scared, but I had to go. And when I went out, I just seen his eyes flickering, but I couldn't speak and I couldn't do nothing. And then the emergency services came and we ended up in the hospital, and they told me it was an uphill struggle and that he took a heart attack in the hospital as well. And it came out about 20 minutes later that he drowned in his own blood. One of the most traumatic scenes I think I remember of the time was when they let me go and they see him afterwards, and all these white sheets was on all around the bed, the floor, and the blood was just dripping off his fingertips and all, and that sight never kind of leaves. The next sort of few days went in a haze of whatever, and you know what, before you realised that you were sitting with 4 children on your own. I didn't get any money from the Northern Ireland office because Trevor had served time in prison, so I didn't get a dependency claim. They didn't pay out in our life insurance policy because he had been threatened. So I was stuck with a big mortgage with 4 children with nothing. Nobody came and offered any help. I got very little family support because both my parents were alcoholics, but my father had died in 1990. And my brothers was all still quite young. So 6 weeks after he died, I had to go back to work. And I had to speak to the mortgage company and all the other, and add his funeral onto my mortgage. And then I just went through this, I don't know, it was like automatic pilot because I had 4 children and they were aged 12 to 7, and I wanted them to be normal people. I didn't want nobody coming and corrupting my son and moan join up because look what happened. That was never happening for me or my children, never. And I think it's one of the greatest achievements I've ever done in my life is that they've grew up very balanced. They judge people on who they are, not what they are. And it's the biggest thing that I've ever done in my life. And I think a lot of stuff that Paul said, I can kind of, I'm at a stage now. I never told my story the last year. I think it was the first time. I didn't think anybody would be interested. And as much as people talk about what happened that night, I think that's the act, but there's a lot behind that then. I felt very let down by a lot of people because when I was really struggling, there was times I had money to buy a loaf of bread or a pint of milk, and I don't say that often because I don't want it to seem as if it's a pity story, but it's a fact. The fact, the reality is, first Christmas, my friend's mum gives them £100 for a Christmas present, and she gave it to me so I could buy the Christmas dinner for my kids. And I thought, well, where's the paramilitaries now? Where's all these people now? Where's all these hundreds of thousands of people was at a funeral telling me he was my best friend? People I never seen in my life. So I could have got very angry and butter, but not butter about being religious, but butter because that, not in a sectarian way, but butter about people, thinking, well, they were there for all the glory, and there he gave his life for an organisation. He was 16, and what have they done for me? No, nothing. So, but you know what? I think Paul says a thing about growing and post-traumatic growth, and I think that's where I'm at. And I'm at a stage where I would like to help others and give others the experience that you had, or co-mentor or whatever, and that's my story.
A courageous, very, very brave story. William, you've been listening to Paul's testimony and to Hazel's testimony there, and both they're different. It's not black and white. It's that the troubles, people sometimes look at the troubles and say, there's one side against the other, but the stories are different, and yet the pain is the same.
Oh, absolutely. It's the first thing I must say is, you've already alluded to it, Stephen, is the courage it must take for Paul and for Hazel to come on and speak so frankly. couple of things that resonated. First of all, it may be a kind of a light point to make, but I always feel a bit of camaraderie, and whenever I hear of a fellow OU student, the studies in psychology I'm doing, I was telling you about, is done with the Open University, and it's been it's fantastic. It's steadied my ship when I needed it, and so
Great springboard,
isn't it? Isn't it?
Yeah.
I can entirely see how Paul has embraced and thrown himself into studies by the sound of it as part of his activism. Hazel is, again, it's the courage in the way. When I was listening to Hazel, it brought back a lot of the stuff, a lot of the David Irvine stuff I read. I read a lot when I was younger, when he read a chapter in the Henry Sinnerton biography of David Irvine refers to the prison experience. And the point that David was always extremely quick to make was, he says, whatever time I spent in prison, my wife Jeanette spent, hers was a prison too. So being the partner of someone involved in the conflict or the troubles, or however you want to view it, is something. It just, it goes on. It's just ripples outward. One thing Hazel said as well was that for a period, the first period of her life, she felt relatively sort of untouched by what had happened, and it's something I can resonate with. I'm 41 next week, so I grew up, and I was 18 years old when the Belfast Agreement was voted upon, and at that stage, I didn't care what the question was. Ian Paisley was the answer. And so I decided I was voting no. I could always read the document later. I wasn't that worried. So that was the attitude that prevailed at that time. And I got into reading about the unionism of the likes of David Irvine and the rest of it. But I was the cheek of me was that I was relatively unscarred for the conflict, despite growing up in some of the worst of it. My parents had a very protective idea that they made a conscious effort to shield me from paramilitarism, which was inherent in it, which was part of the community around here. I live in East Belfast, by the way. And it wasn't until the conflict subsided with the peace process and so on and so forth, and it was only then that one of the best friends I ever had in my life, Lyra, was taken from us. So during the accepted period of the conflict, of whatever, I'm choosing my words carefully here, I actually got off unscathed. It was only at that point when Lyra was expressing concern for me, because I was going to be a candidate and so on, and then what happened to her happened, and it was just through everything I thought I believed into turmoil. But the overwhelming feeling I have at the moment is appreciation for Paul and Hazel for sharing with us.
Thanks, William. And the Lyra that you're referring to is Lyra McKee, who was
yes,
who was murdered only last year. Was it last year?
Yeah, yes, that's right. April 2019.
And you also referred there to David Irvine, who is a man that was on a journey, and he would have, most of us think that he would have made a big, big difference. He was a great leader.
Yes, he was. Yep. Yeah, the thing that of all his quotes, he's just quite quotable, a figure from political history here. I remember he said at the time that when he would get stick for his willingness to talk with nationalists and his willingness to talk with Irish Republicans, and he responded one time by saying, republicanism isn't contagious. It's okay to speak to people. And so it was that point. It was the reason I embraced the PUP as opposed to any other unionist party, was that it was very open to dialogue and very open to the peace process.
And I mean, many of us follow you on Twitter. That you seem like somebody who is very, very keen to engage in dialogue and to talk to people that perhaps don't come from your own community, and always very tolerant. I really, really hope to see you enter mainstream politics as soon as possible, because we need people like yourself.
You're very kind, Stephen. Well, as I said, I stood for council there last year. It was about the time of Lyra's death. And I came close. I think I was only between 2,000 and 3,000 votes out. So I'm just going to stick at it.
Great. Best of luck with that. Tom, your thoughts on what you've just heard?
My goodness. It's strange what's brought us all here together tonight. So thanks very much, Paul and Hazel and William. To try and just find the words to respond to your your experiences. Like I joined the army down south in 1989. But in the mid-90s, I went to the Middle East. I was in Lebanon as a peacekeeper, and I was there as a young army officer. It was a very violent deployment, and we went every day. I was in charge of the battalion mobile reserve, so we had big armored personnel carriers. We went out when there was an airstrike on a house or a helicopter gunship attack on a village, or artillery or missile strikes on these houses. You'd have whole families in those houses, you know, grandparents, parents, children, infants, and we were digging them out, pulling them out of the ground, and they were slaughtered, they were butchered. And it culminated in a massacre in a village called Clonan, where 117 men, women and children were killed in one incident. And like, I grew up in Dublin. We didn't have the troubles. You know, the loudest noise I would have heard before I went to Lebanon was maybe a car backfiring on O'Connell Street, or, you know, the fireworks at Halloween or Guy Fawkes or whatever. So one of the things, though, that struck me, the massacre at Clonan, 24 hours after that, I was on the first rotation out of Lebanon. I was back on Grafton Street, walking up Grafton Street, holding hands with my girlfriend. So I went from that traumatic experience to normality, and I feel safe. I feel safe at home. But what happened to you, Paul, and what happened to you, Hazel, it didn't happen, you know, 2,000 miles away in the Middle East, in a strange environment with a different language and a different climate. It happened in your home. It happened in your house. It happened to you, Hazel, in the front seat of your car with the man that you loved. And Paul, you know, you were only a young guy when that happened. In the house with your dad there, and somebody fires an automatic weapon through the door. I mean, so I can't even begin to imagine the trauma and the pain that you've experienced. I did notice with you both, Hazel, you said at one point when you described the events of that night, you know, your whole narrative speeded up, and the detail and the vividness in which you told the story of what you saw to your left, your husband's arm grabbing you by the waist, seeing the gunmen, one at the front and one at the side. And similarly with you, Paul, you know, describing that moment of madness when you heard the kick at the door and then the shots being fired, and the wounds that you suffered to your lung, to your spine, to your spleen. So look, all I can say to you is that by sharing these experiences with people like me, if we can, by talking to one another and reaching out to each other, if we can prevent this happening to somebody else or help our children and our neighbours feel safe, because we've got a lot of challenges on this island in the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years. We've some interesting times ahead, and we all have to, like what I've learned from tonight and from my experiences in the Middle East is that we're all brothers and sisters. We're all the same. It doesn't matter, you know, we're all the same people with the same emotions and the same desires for our children. And I really think the truth we have to have these moments of truth and sharing for full reconciliation. One small thing, 7 years after the massacre of Clonan, we buried our little girl here in Dublin, and that was the first time that I reconnected with that traumatic experience. It took about 7 years for it to happen, and it was another trauma in my life that reconnected me with it. I went through a period of feeling very, very angry. I have a son who, at the time my daughter died, he was diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease. He's a wheelchair user. And we had to come to terms with the shock of that diagnosis and all the grieving that happens after it. But, you know, some of the things you described, you know, the life that you had before, the life that came afterwards, but the potential within that life for growth. And I can't tell you how much I admire you both for the way that you've told your story and the dignity. And the one thing that really strikes me is your desire, Hazel, and your desire, Paul, to help other people and make sure that this never happens to anybody else. And
I suppose it's what Tom says. It's about hearing all the different stories out there, and no story is every story is different, but we can all empathize with each other, and I think that's the most important thing for the society, is to be able to sit in rooms with people who, especially on Zoom and things like that, the opportunity to do it, and there's people sitting in different parts of the world who are able to sit and talk and listen to these stories, and I think there's an opportunity there with that. We don't all have to go to a room and try and congregate around there. This is a new way of doing it, but it's about just sharing these stories out there and getting something from people by hearing their stories. And what I've heard tonight from everybody, it will add to my empathy and will help me through. But also the fact that you and people like you are good listeners also helps to revalidates my story. And it's just a point that you picked up there, Tom, about being in your safe place and your safe space. I always say that when people say you're a victim of something, you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. We were all in the right place at the right time. We were in our homes and just going about our business. But people come along with whatever they have intentions in their minds to do whatever they're going to do, and you can't really do much about it. It's just about how you react to it. I think is what makes you, and it doesn't happen overnight. None of this happened overnight for any of us. It took years of the struggle with the new reality, about nearly being born again on that day.
Hazel, have you got any thoughts on what either William or Tom has said about your experience?
I think when you live it, you don't really see it as that. My coping strategy and my coping mechanism was I blocked it out. I pretended it didn't actually happen. When I did the thing in the Playhouse in September, that was the first time my children ever heard the story. And I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but my son was in Australia and he listened to it online. And since then he's had to go to counselling. And I feel so far away from him now, but he did say, Mommy, you know, when I was being a moody teenager and giving you hell, as teenagers do, he says, I didn't know what you'd been through. And he says, I feel bad. So he was nearly apologetic for being a normal teenager. And I felt that was a good thing. I mean, you know, they were talking about being in the army. And it's, you know, the other side of, you know, my son-in-law was in the Irish Army from Sligo. And again, that's a thing for me because my kids are very diverse in their backgrounds. And if I had have stayed that, you know, people I felt would have used your kids, but you know what, they took enough and they weren't robbing my children of their childhood.
Is there some way, William, that we can take this forward and just tell everybody, this is what TaRP tries to do. We say that, you know, nobody has a monopoly on the suffering there. How do we unite them, the people, and unite the stories and just condemn the violence? How would you do that?
Well, to be honest, Stephen, I think you've demonstrated it quite well yourself, in which the survivors and the victims are each there. They're each given their space to speak, and the lineup is diverse. You've seen the different perspectives, and I think it's about basically giving people the platforms and the microphones to have their voices heard. And I think was it Joe? I think it was just said that the stories be told without the political slant.
Yeah.
And I think it's the people who've been through hell, people who've been through the way Hazel, the way, to be honest, most of the panel has. They, given them their space to speak uninterrupted and allow it to be seen that they can do so sat together in the same platform. I think really that it's something Paul alluded to earlier on. You've got social media nowadays, which wasn't always there. And I think that's, I have no doubt, like friendships, like Lyra and my friendship is something that wouldn't have happened a generation ago. She was from the Antrim Road, I was from East Belfast. It may not have happened a generation ago. It can now. We have facilities like this, and hopefully after the pandemic and the health scare is over, we can get back to. I love the social element of when we get together and speak in that regard as well. But it's essentially about giving people their voice and respecting others to use theirs as well. I really think it's really that straightforward.
It's been a privilege to talk to all of you, to Paul, to Hazel, Tom and William, and of course to my colleagues from TaRP, Eugene and Joe. And I want to thank the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Ireland for facilitating and supporting us with this Truth and Reconciliation platform venture. If you get an opportunity, please visit our website. It's TaRP.ie or TaRP.global and learn more about what we do. Thanks very much, folks, and please God, we'll all stay in touch.